Hey everyone, my name is Lance and this is Amped About Aimpad. For today's episode, I'd like to talk about something that I haven't talked about before, and that's the switches that we're using that support analog functionality. So I've spent a lot of time with different types of switches. I've had a kind of unhealthy obsession with trying to find the perfect analog switch, and I'd like to share the fruits of my labors. So in order to do that, I kind of want to overview the different types of switches in case you're not familiar with what is out there. So there's quite a lot of different variety of switches. A lot of them are designated by the color of the switch itself, and that lets you visually know what the different properties of those switches are. So the first type of switch is a linear switch. So that type of switch is what we're actually using in the Aimpad prototypes. But basically those switches have a very clean press as you push them down. There's no resistance or bumps or any sounds that it makes as you're pushing down the switch. It's just a nice smooth press all the way down. Another type of switch is one that has some type of tactile bump. So these are commonly known as a brown switch or as a clear switch. So these ones, basically when you push down the switch, it has a certain amount of resistance against it because there's a bump in the slider, and so as you push it, it resists, and then it goes and collapses underneath that press. So you have some type of tactile response as you're typing on the keys. The next one is one that actually gives you an audible click. So these ones are commonly referred to as blue and green switches. So you can kind of hear a little clicking sound as you push it down. But it's along the same lines. As you push down the switch, it has a little kind of snapping action of the two pieces of plastic in the switch will snap together and give you the sound that, oh yeah, I've pushed that switch all the way down. So that's the general overview of the different types of switches. Another aspect of switches that is different is the springs. So there's springs inside each switch, and I don't know if I can get close enough to show you here or not. Probably not. I'm not going to focus on it. But basically, there's tons of different variety of switches, but more or less the principle of springs are the more coils that you have in the spring, the lighter of a press is required to compress that spring, and the less winds around the spring, the harder it is to push. So you need to have kind of a good variety of those types of springs to give you an idea of, well, what type of press do you prefer? Do you want a lot of resistance on your press, or do you want just a little bit of resistance on your press? And that's also indicated typically by the color. So there's some interesting things in my testing of all these different types of switches, and I'd kind of like to overview that a little bit. But before I do that, I just want to visually demonstrate what's going on with these analog switches. So if I use this as an example of what our sensor is, and the sensor is mounted on the circuit board of the keyboard, and then this represents the switch as you push it down. So basically, there's two parts of this sensor. One is shining a big old infrared light up at the switch, and then there's a sensor on the side that says how much light is coming back. So when the switch is up at the top, there's a low amount of light that's getting reflected back because some of it's scattering off in different directions and things like that. But as you push it down, more and more light gets reflected back onto that second part of that sensor, and that gives you the variability of the switch as you're pushing it down. So as it knows that when it's this close that there's a ton of light getting reflected, and that alters the amount of voltage that is being monitored. And so we have a big swing of values and translate that into some type of meaningful use for games or mouse control or things like that I previously demonstrated. So what I'd like to do is kind of move the camera over here closer to this prototype that I set up specifically for the purpose of demonstrating what can be done with these different switches and what they feel like. So I'll go ahead and do that now. Alright, so here I've set up the camera really close here to the location of the switches. I've set this board up. Basically the whole point of this board is to test these switches and the effect that it causes on them. And so what I'd like to do is first kind of show you something interesting you might not have thought about. So I can actually place these switches just in these little plates, and I don't actually need to solder these switches to the circuit board in order for the analog functions to work, because I'm using optical measurements, so I don't need any electrical soldering points. So I can place these key switches in here and pull it out with this little tool, and that will allow me to swap it in with some other type of switches. So just easily swapping back and forth. So basically for this demonstration, what I'd like to do is just use these first tactile switches. So I have the blue one here, the clear one here, green one here, and brown one here. Now, one thing that, since these switches have different properties and they have different sensitivities and there's manufacturing differences and all sorts of things, I'm using switches from 3 different manufacturers. One is obviously Cherry, another one is from Gateron, and another one is from Zelio, or Zeal PC. They call them Zelio switches. They're also manufactured by Gateron as well. I've also tested some with Matthias and others, but I'm going to focus on just those first 3 for this demonstration. So basically, since those properties are so different between each of the different manufacturers, and even if I take one switch that's exactly the same as another one, like a cherry red switch, and pull it out and put in another one, it's going to exhibit different properties. Simply because there's too much variance and we're sensing things at such a high level that there's going to be noticeable difference between each key. So in order to work around that, there's a calibration routine that's built in to the keyboard. So I'm going to stick these keycaps on here real quick and show you what that calibration process looks like, since I haven't really demonstrated that before either. But I basically do this FN and scroll lock, and now basically what it's doing is it's looking at the very top of the key press and at the very bottom of the key press and writing values to the firmware saying this is the absolute highest value I'm reading and this is the absolute lowest value I'm reading. So this is the range of values that you can use for this switch. So when I push down this W key, this is the blue, I think it's the blue switch, I can remember now, blue or green, but basically as I push it down you might be able to hear the small click as I'm pushing it down. So the problem with these types of switches is if I push this down just a little bit, I'm getting a significant amount of resistance on the key switch, but nothing's actually happening on the screen. You can see like that it's not moving until I actually push past the click. So now I only have about 2 millimeters of press in order to get some type of response. It's okay, but it's not great. You want the full key press to be analog. So I wouldn't recommend using blue or green switches. Yes, they work fine. You can see I actually am able to control it, but you actually get finer control on the release. So I can after I've already activated the key, it responds pretty nicely all the way through. But it's that first initial press, it's pretty distracting, and it's not an ideal solution. This other one is the clear, and I have a similar type of response. So I actually push it down a little bit, and it has pretty good response. You can see it starting to move, but there's that bump that's interfering with the key press, so I feel like I'm fighting that bump constantly in this area. Once I'm past it, yeah, it's fine. It responds in a linear fashion, but again, on the release and on the press, this area right here is really awkward. The last one is this brown one, and when I push it, nothing is actually happening, and I'll talk about why in a second. So that gives you kind of an idea what's going on with these ones. So if I pull these guys off and swap them out with some linear ones, I got a linear white one, and a linear black one, and a linear red one, and a linear yellow one. So these are all from different manufacturers and different qualities, but again I have to do the same process, and I have to stick these keycaps on to get a new calibrated value, because if I just use these ones by themselves, you can see on the screen I'm getting some weird things. It's not centered, and I'm not getting a nice smooth response. I don't know, it's not taking the full read basically, so I do need to recalibrate them. Let's see here, WA. So I'll start that calibration process again, and we'll push all the keys in. Sure it gets a good reading. And now you see it's recentered itself based off of those new calibrated values of these types of switches. So when I push in this W key, I get a nice clean press all the way through. Nice clean press all the way through. And the D key and the S is not responding at all, and I'll explain why. So the reason for that is I basically have tested all these different types of switches, all these different things about them, and the biggest impact on the effectiveness of a switch is actually the color, simply because we're using the stem color, or we're using the stem itself to generate this analog signal. So that color is actually absorbing a certain amount of infrared light, and that's causing some problems with different types of colors that you use. So I did a bunch of extensive testing, and these are the results of different enclosures and different colors and things like that. And so you'll see on the far left, there's some interesting things, particularly with black that goes on, but also brown. Since those colors are so dark, they actually absorb a lot of the infrared light, and that's a big problem. On the black itself, it actually absorbs more light the further you push the key down, so it has an inverse relationship with all the other ones, which is kind of funny. But black, unfortunately, doesn't work at all because of that reason. Brown is also, I would highly not recommend using brown because it, again, absorbs all the light. Now, green and blue and white are relatively good. So I get this measurements here. You can see it says 400. So that means it's able to measure 400 unique values from the very top of the key press all the way down to the very bottom of the key press. It's pretty good. So if you're a big fan of blue and greens and clears and things like that, they are pretty good. I personally wouldn't recommend it, but it can be done. The far four ones are the most interesting to me because they provide the best usage. So cherry reds give you 800 counts. So that's double the counts of green. And that's pretty impressive. The higher counts you have, the more flexibility you have to do interesting things like cleaning up the signal. You can throw away a bunch of values and not have to worry about the signal. You can do low-pass filtering and all sorts of fun stuff that gives you a lot more flexibility the more counts you have. So on the far right, the last three, this is actually something new because I tested it this weekend and got some new switches that were yellow, and I was astounded on the impact of the yellow switches. It increases, it's over double using a Gateron red or a Zelio red switch in the sensitivity, and I was astounded at how effective that was. Now you might think, all right, well, what good is double the counts? And the way I'd like to explain it is if you've used a 60 hertz monitor and then recently bought like a 144 hertz monitor, and I actually did that just recently, and the difference is like that. You would think, all right, 60 hertz is pretty good. It's good. I mean, that's the benchmark for good performance on PC. But 144 hertz is so freaking smooth and beautiful. That is what we should try to strive for. And the same thing with these. Having 1200 counts is the equivalent of having like a 144 hertz monitor for analog switches. It feels so smooth, and you feel like you have direct control over what is happening when you push that switch down. It is phenomenal. So I'm highly impressed with how that worked out. And actually, it's interesting. Cherry doesn't sell any yellow switches, so I had to use a Gateron yellow stem and stick it inside a Cherry housing. But when I did that, it actually had a small amount. I would think it's like, I don't know, somewhere around 20 and 30 counts higher than a normal Gateron yellow switch. So if that was a motivation for Cherry to make a yellow switch, I think that would be it. Alright, so I have decided to set up this keyboard using all yellow switches, and I am started up the game MechWarrior Online, so I want to go ahead and place these keycaps back on so that I can use the keyboard effectively. I've already pre-calibrated it for this game, or for these keys, and so we're pretty much ready to go. So MechWarrior Online allows you to control these giant mechs that you are battling other mechs, basically. Very new to the game. Someone actually introduced it to me just this weekend that was interested in what Aimpad was doing, and he's like, hey, have you tried out MechWarrior Online? I was like, nope, I haven't, so let me go ahead and try that out. So this video is for him. Basically, the controls you have here, you want to use your mouse to control lasers and things like that to provide effective killing prowess, but you also independently control your feet from where your aim is pointed. So on the ground, you'll see this white line. So if I move myself slowly here with the A key, or right with the D key, I can adjust which direction I'm going to move. And using the W key, if I push it in a small amount, that yellow bar that's increasing towards the middle of the screen is the speed that I'm actually moving at. So if I basically combine the two and move myself as fast as I want. I'll push the key down all the way, and that's as fast as I can go. But I can ease it off and go as fast or as whichever trajectory I want to, and independently control the lasers at the same time. I am not probably qualified to say if that's effective or not, but I can say, comparing it to a keyboard, it's a massive difference. So if you'll know that I didn't actually solder any of these key switches to the keyboard. So if I switch this back to keyboard mode, if I push W, A, S, and D, nothing's happening because I haven't soldered the cherry or the electrical components to the circuit board in this particular layout. So I'll have to switch the keyboard back to analog mode and enable the analog functions of activating these keys. So these keys are set to be activated at the very top of the WASD. The problem now, I have no way to control how fast I'm going. So if you'll see that middle bar of my speed, if I push down the W key, I immediately ramp up to 100%, and I have to kind of tap, tap, tap to keep a constant speed. Same thing with my right and left. If I barely tap the screen, I'm shifting left and right a huge amount, which I would imagine would be suckiness, trying to do both of this speed of control while trying to aim and shoot at the same time. It's horrendous in my opinion. Yes, it can be done, but my goodness, why would you want to have such an artificial movement to look at? I'm playing in third-person mode right now, and I'll switch into first-person. It's the same type of thing. I have my field of view up really high, but regardless, just tapping left and right, I'm moving my whole mech, and I'd have to kind of fight that whole thing constantly just to try and aim at something if I'm moving. So otherwise, I'd have to move, stop, aim, shoot, move, stop, aim, shoot. And that just seems like it would be a tactical advantage to be able to move at the same time and shoot at the same time and not lose accuracy. So if I switch this back to my normal analog Xbox controller mode, I have smooth movement left and right and can independently control my aim and my direction and my speed all at the same time. So it's a pretty effective way to do it. Again, I'm not the best person to say since I just started this game, but I think that's a pretty effective way to play MechWarrior Online. Alright, so there you go. Playing MechWarrior Online with an analog keyboard I think was pretty effective, and a pretty good overview of the power of analog switches and what can be brought about by them. This is my call out to Cherry. Make a yellow switch for me, please, because that would be freaking awesome. Thanks for watching. If you like these videos and want to learn more about analog switches, go ahead and subscribe. We'd be happy to have you. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, until next time, thank you for watching.